November 3rd, 1944. 12:15 hours. Airspace above Rhine, northwestern Germany. Hauptmann Klaus Neumann had flown combat missions since 1941 and survived encounters with every major Allied fighter type. His Focke-Wulf 190 had battled Spitfires over the Channel, Thunderbolts over France, and Mustangs deep into Germany. He understood each opponent's strengths and limitations. Against Spitfires, stay low, where the FW-190's superior roll rate provided advantage. Against Mustangs, avoid extended pursuit, where their range and high-altitude performance dominated. Survive through understanding enemy capabilities and exploiting their weaknesses. Today's mission was ground attack interdiction. Locate and destroy Allied reconnaissance aircraft operating over German supply lines. Neumann spotted a lone aircraft at 6,000 feet, silhouette suggesting a Typhoon or similar ground attack type. Easy prey if he could achieve surprise. He positioned his 190 above and behind, preparing for a diving attack that would give him speed advantage and first shot opportunity. The British aircraft's profile was wrong for a Typhoon, too sleek. The wing shape was different, thinner, more refined. Neumann hesitated, trying to identify the type. That moment of uncertainty saved his life. The British fighter suddenly broke hard left with acceleration that seemed impossible for its size, reversed the brake into a climbing spiral, and was suddenly above Neumann's position, despite having started below and ahead of him. Neumann dove, using the FW-190's excellent diving characteristics to build separation. The British fighter followed, not just matching his dive, but visibly closing the distance. Neumann pulled up hard, trying to force an overshoot where the pursuing aircraft's speed would carry it past him. The British fighter pulled up with him, maintaining position as if connected by invisible wire. Neumann tried a series of violent snap rolls, the 190's signature defensive maneuver that most Allied fighters couldn't match. The British fighter stayed with him through each roll, closing steadily. His radio crackled with frantic German voices. New British fighter type, extremely fast at low altitude. The transmission cut off. Neumann was now fighting for his life against an opponent that matched or exceeded his aircraft in every performance category he'd counted on for survival. He tried one final desperate maneuver, a maximum performance dive toward the deck, planning to use terrain masking to break visual contact. The British fighter followed him down, and Neumann watched with disbelief as it actually gained on him during the dive. At 200 meters altitude, traveling at speeds that should have been tearing both aircraft apart, the British fighter opened fire. 4 cannon rounds struck Neumann's 190, destroying his engine and forcing immediate bailout. As he descended under parachute, he watched the British fighter, a type he later learned was called Tempest, climbing away at an angle and rate of climb that his Focke-Wulf couldn't have matched even with a functioning engine. Neumann was captured within hours and interrogated 2 days later. His assessment of the Tempest was immediate and emphatic. "It's faster than anything we have at low altitude. It accelerates like nothing I've encountered. It turns tighter than aircraft that size should physically be able to turn. And the pilot's skill was exceptional. I had no chance once he saw me. None. That aircraft represents a fundamental problem for the Luftwaffe. We have no counter to it below 15,000 feet. The beast that emerged from necessity. The Hawker Tempest emerged from operational requirements that existing fighters couldn't adequately address. By 1943, the RAF needed an aircraft optimized for low-altitude combat, where German Focke-Wulf 190s dominated, capable of catching fast-moving ground targets and able to engage the new German jet aircraft that were beginning to appear. The Spitfire excelled at high-altitude interception and dogfighting, but lacked the low-level performance the evolving air war demanded. The Typhoon provided excellent ground attack capability, but suffered from performance limitations and structural issues that prevented it from being the complete solution. Sidney Cam's design team at Hawker approached the problem through systematic aerodynamic refinement. The Tempest would use a completely new wing design, a thin, elliptical laminar flow wing that generated substantially less drag than conventional designs while maintaining strength and fuel capacity. This wing would give the aircraft speed and handling characteristics fundamentally different from its contemporaries. Combined with the Napier Sabre engine, a 24-cylinder beast producing over 2,000 horsepower, the result would be an aircraft optimized for the combat environment where the Luftwaffe still held advantages. The development program moved with remarkable speed by wartime standards. From initial design work in 1941 to first combat deployment in 1944, the Tempest progressed through testing and refinement while incorporating lessons from operational Typhoon experience. The production aircraft that emerged represented British aeronautical engineering at its most effective, not revolutionary in any single aspect, but optimized systematically across every performance parameter that mattered for low-altitude combat. The specifications were impressive on paper and devastating in practice. Maximum speed at low altitude approached 440 miles per hour, faster than any other piston engine fighter operating in the European theater at comparable altitudes. Rate of climb exceeded 4,000 feet per minute. Service ceiling reached 36,000 feet, despite optimization for low-level work. Range with external tanks exceeded 1,500 miles. Armament consisted of 4 20mm Hispano cannons with sufficient ammunition for extended combat. These numbers translated to tactical capabilities that fundamentally changed the low-altitude air combat environment. The Tempest could catch any German aircraft operating below 10,000 feet. It could sustain high-speed maneuvering without the structural failures that plagued earlier designs. It could engage ground targets with devastating effectiveness, then fight its way out against German fighters attempting to intercept it. Most critically, it could do all of this reliably. The Napier Sabre engine's teething problems had been resolved, and the airframe proved remarkably robust under combat stress. First blood, when the hunters became hunted. The Tempest entered combat operations in April 1944, initially deployed to counter the V-1 flying bomb threat that British intelligence knew was imminent. The timing proved fortunate. When Germany launched the V-1 campaign in June, Tempest squadrons were operational and positioned to intercept. The results validated every performance claim the aircraft's designers had made. The V-1 flew at approximately 400 miles per hour at low altitude, too fast for most Allied fighters to catch reliably. Standard Spitfire variants lacked the speed to overtake V-1s except in favorable conditions. The Tempest could not only catch the flying bombs, but had sufficient speed margin to position for optimal attack angles. RAF pilots developed techniques that transformed V-1 interception from desperate chase into systematic destruction. The standard method was direct gunnery, closing to effective cannon range and destroying the V-1's warhead with cannon fire. This required precise shooting, because the V-1's explosion could damage pursuing aircraft. Tempest pilots learned to fire short bursts from optimal range, then break away immediately. The alternative method, wing tipping, involved flying alongside the V-1 and using airflow disruption to destabilize it. This technique required exceptional flying skill and nerves of steel, as it meant maneuvering within meters of a weapon carrying nearly a ton of high explosive. The statistics documented Tempest effectiveness against the V-1 threat. Between June and September 1944, Tempest squadrons destroyed over 800 V-1 flying bombs, approximately one-third of all V-1s shot down by aircraft. Individual pilots achieved remarkable scores. One Tempest pilot destroyed 7 V-1s in a single 24-hour period. The success rate exceeded 80% when Tempests achieved interception before V-1s reached London's defensive perimeter. German intelligence monitoring V-1 effectiveness noted the dramatic increase in interception rates but initially failed to identify the Tempest as the primary cause. The V-1 campaign provided Tempest pilots with extraordinary operational experience, flying their aircraft at maximum performance. They learned the Tempest's handling characteristics at speeds approaching its structural limits. They mastered precision, flying in conditions where mistakes meant instant death. They developed confidence in their aircraft's capabilities that would prove decisive when they began encountering German fighters and ground targets. Normandy, the low-altitude killing ground. The Tempest deployment to the Normandy campaign in summer 1944 brought it into the combat environment it had been designed to dominate. The ground attack and fighter sweep missions over northern France provided perfect conditions for the aircraft's strengths. Low-altitude operations, where speed and firepower determined survival, against German forces that had grown accustomed to owning that airspace. German Focke-Wulf 190s had dominated low-altitude combat over France since their introduction. The 190's excellent roll rate, good diving speed, and heavy armament made it superior to most Allied fighters below 10,000 feet. Luftwaffe pilots used this advantage ruthlessly, ambushing Allied aircraft at low level where the 190's characteristics gave them decisive edge. The arrival of Tempests reversed this tactical equation completely. The first encounters between Tempests and Focke-Wulf 190s shocked German pilots who'd grown confident in their aircraft's low-level superiority. Tempests proved faster in level flight, faster in dives, comparable in roll rate, and superior in sustained turns. The combination meant that 190 pilots lost every advantage they'd counted on. Their standard escape maneuver, diving away at high speed, failed because Tempests could follow and close distance. Their ambush tactics failed because Tempests could accelerate out of danger before German pilots could achieve firing solutions. Their defensive maneuvers failed because Tempests could match them through any sequence of rolls and turns. British combat reports from Normandy documented the psychological impact. German fighters that had aggressively engaged other Allied aircraft would break off immediately upon identifying Tempests. Luftwaffe pilots interviewed after capture consistently stated that Tempests were to be avoided if possible and engaged only with significant numerical advantage. One captured 190 pilot stated, "We were told the Tempest could be outmaneuvered at very low altitude if we stayed below 500 meters. This was incorrect. The Tempest dominates at any altitude below 3,000 meters. Engaging them is suicide unless we achieve complete surprise." The ground attack capability proved equally devastating. Tempests operating in the fighter-bomber role destroyed German armor, vehicles, and trains with remarkable efficiency. The 420mm cannons could penetrate light armor and destroy soft-skinned vehicles with single bursts. The aircraft's speed made it extremely difficult for German anti-aircraft gunners to achieve effective hits. Tempests would appear, attack, and be gone before defensive fires could be organized. German ground forces learned to recognize the distinctive sound of the Napier Sabre engine and take cover immediately, understanding that the attack would follow within seconds. The Falaise pocket operations in August 1944 showcased Tempest effectiveness in the ground attack role. RAF squadrons equipped with Tempests flew continuous missions against German forces attempting to escape encirclement. The aircraft's combination of speed, firepower, and ability to operate at extremely low altitude allowed pilots to attack retreating columns despite heavy anti-aircraft fire. German reports from survivors of the Falaise battle specifically mentioned British fighter bombers that attacked at such high speed that defensive measures were ineffective. The cumulative destruction contributed substantially to the Wehrmacht's losses during the retreat from Normandy. The jet hunters, Tempests vs. Me, 262. The appearance of German Messerschmitt 262 jet fighters in late 1944 created new challenges for Allied air forces. The Me-262 possessed speed and climb performance that exceeded any piston-engine fighter. In level flight or climbing, the jet was untouchable. But jets had vulnerabilities. They consumed fuel rapidly, requiring frequent returns to base. Their engines were temperamental and required careful handling. Most critically, they were vulnerable during takeoff and landing when speed advantages disappeared. Tempest squadrons developed tactics specifically for engaging Me-262s. Direct pursuit was futile. The jet's speed advantage made it impossible to catch in level flight. Instead, Tempest pilots positioned near known Me-262 bases and waited for jets to take off or return from missions. During these phases, the Me-262's speed was reduced to levels where Tempests could engage effectively. The tactic was patient, methodical, and devastatingly effective. The first confirmed Tempest kill of a Me-262 occurred in October 1944, when a Tempest pilot caught a jet during its landing approach. The Me-262, committed to landing with undercarriage down and speed reduced, couldn't escape. The Tempest pilot closed to optimal firing range and destroyed the jet with a single cannon burst. Subsequent kills followed the same pattern. Tempests waiting near airfields, identifying jets in vulnerable phases of flight, and engaging before the Me-262 could accelerate to its maximum performance. German jet pilots learned to fear the approaches to their own airfields. Luftwaffe commanders attempted to provide fighter cover during jet operations, but this required coordinating conventional fighters with jets whose speeds were completely incompatible. The alternative, increasing anti-aircraft defenses around jet bases, proved only partially effective because Tempests could attack from unexpected angles at high speed. The cumulative result was that Me-262s faced serious danger every time they took off or landed, which limited their operational effectiveness regardless of their theoretical performance advantages. The psychological impact on Luftwaffe morale was significant. The Me-262 represented Germany's technological trump card, proof that German engineering could still produce weapons the Allies couldn't match. Losing these advanced aircraft to British piston-engine fighters during takeoff and landing was humiliating and frightening. It demonstrated that technological advantage alone couldn't ensure survival, and that Allied pilots and aircraft could still find ways to defeat Germany's best weapons. The final months, Tempest Ascendant. The last 6 months of the war saw Tempest squadrons operating at peak effectiveness against a Luftwaffe that was collapsing under multiple pressures. Fuel shortages grounded many German aircraft. Pilot training had degraded to the point where new German pilots were dangerously inexperienced. Allied air superiority meant that German forces rarely operated in favorable conditions. Within this environment, the Tempest became apex predator, hunting German aircraft and ground targets with near impunity. The ground attack missions during this period were particularly effective. Tempest pilots attacked German supply lines, troop concentrations, and retreating columns with devastating results. The combination of speed and firepower meant single Tempest could destroy multiple vehicles in single pass, then escape before German anti-aircraft could respond effectively. Some missions recorded destruction of dozens of vehicles by small numbers of Tempests operating in areas where slower aircraft would have faced prohibitive defenses. Fighter operations continued to achieve impressive results despite the declining quality of Luftwaffe opposition. Tempest pilots engaged and destroyed German fighters that were attempting to defend against Allied bombing raids. The speed advantage allowed Tempests to catch German fighters attempting to escape after engaging bomber formations. The maneuverability allowed Tempests to defend themselves against the few remaining skilled German pilots who attempted to turn disadvantageous situations into victories through superior technique. The final Tempest combat missions of the war occurred in early May 1945, days before German surrender. RAF squadrons were still conducting ground attack and fighter sweep operations against diminishing German resistance. The operational tempo had decreased as targets became scarce, but the effectiveness remained high. The last German aircraft destroyed by Tempests fell to pilots who'd been flying the type for nearly a year and had developed exceptional skill in exploiting its capabilities. The sound German pilots learned to fear. The Napier Sabre engine's distinctive sound became audio signature that German forces learned to recognize and dread. The 24-cylinder configuration produced a deep, powerful note unlike any other aircraft engine. At low altitude, where Tempests operated most effectively, that sound carried clearly and arrived with minimal warning before the aircraft itself appeared. German ground forces, hearing the Sabre's roar, knew they had seconds to take cover before cannons opened fire. German pilots, hearing it, understood they were about to face an opponent that exceeded their aircraft's capabilities. The psychological dimension was as important as the physical threat. Soldiers and airmen who'd survived Tempest attacks described the experience in terms that emphasized helplessness and inevitability. The aircraft was too fast to escape, too well armed to survive being caught, and too maneuverable to outfly. Encountering a Tempest meant depending on luck rather than skill for survival, and that knowledge was corrosive to morale and combat effectiveness. Hauptmann Klaus Neumann, recovered from his bailout injuries and imprisoned in Britain, was interviewed about his Tempest encounter in April 1945. His assessment remained consistent with his immediate post-combat reaction. "I'd fought Spitfires, Mustangs, Thunderbolts, and various other Allied fighters. Each had strengths and weaknesses I could exploit if I flew intelligently. The Tempest had no exploitable weaknesses at low altitude. It was simply superior in every performance category that mattered. Surviving required the Tempest pilot making an error or choosing not to kill me. My skill and experience were irrelevant once the Tempest had me in sight." He paused, then added, "The Spitfire is the aircraft we all knew and respected. The Tempest is the aircraft we feared. There's a difference. You respect an opponent who might beat you in fair fight. You fear an opponent who makes the fight unfair through sheer superiority. The Tempest made every low-altitude engagement unfair in Britain's favor. That was the Tempest's triumph, not through revolutionary technology or exotic capabilities, but through systematic excellence in the combat environment where it was deployed. It was faster than everything it fought against at low altitude. It could outmaneuver most opponents in the turning fights that characterized low-level combat. It could destroy any aircraft with single burst of cannon fire. It could engage ground targets effectively, then fight its way out against defending fighters. And it did all of this reliably, mission after mission, throughout the war's final year. The aircraft wasn't as famous as the Spitfire or as numerous as the Mustang. It didn't earn the same place in popular imagination or benefit from the same propaganda attention. But to German pilots who encountered it below 10,000 feet, to Luftwaffe commanders trying to protect their jet aircraft, to Wehrmacht soldiers watching their supply columns destroyed by aircraft too fast to defend against, the Tempest was the Allied fighter that mattered most, because it was the one that killed them when they thought they were safe, the one that caught them when they tried to run, the one that turned low-altitude airspace, where Germany had maintained advantage for years, into killing ground where British fighters hunted with near impunity. The Tempest proved that sometimes the most feared weapon isn't the most famous one. It's the one that works exactly as designed, in the exact conditions where it's needed, against enemies who have no effective counter to it. German pilots learned that lesson watching Tempests destroy their aircraft, their comrades, and their confidence that any altitude or speed provided safety from British fighters. The deep roar of the Napier Sabre meant death was coming at over 400 miles per hour, with 4 20mm cannons, flown by pilots who knew their aircraft was faster than anything the Luftwaffe could field at low level. That knowledge, that certainty of British advantage, was what made the Tempest more feared than any other Allied fighter by the German pilots who actually had to fight against it. They could respect the Spitfire's grace and the Mustang's range. They feared the Tempest because it gave them no chance to survive through skill or courage. Just speed, firepower, and British engineering excellence applied systematically to create an aircraft that dominated the low-altitude war completely. And in the final analysis, fear was more operationally significant than respect, because fear meant German pilots avoided combat when they could, hesitated when they couldn't, and died when the Tempest caught them anyway. That was victory through aircraft design, not inspiring admiration, but inducing terror in opponents who understood they were comprehensively outmatched.